In 2014, Russia annexed the peninsula of Crimea. The region had been a part of Russia for many years before it was transferred to Ukraine. Following the annexation, the United States, along with the EU and other Western powers, called the annexation illegal, and as a result, they imposed heavy sanctions on Russia. Although the Crimean annexation is generally viewed by both the government and the media as a political problem, I thought it would be interesting to look at it from an international law perspective. This conflict presents the opportunity to examine the tension that arises as a result of two foundational principles of international law, both of which are part of the United Nations Charter. And these two principles are the respect for territorial integrity and the respect for self-determination. The principle of respect for territorial integrity holds that countries should avoid promoting border changes or secessionist movements in other countries. A country should respect the borders of its neighbors and not attempt to rearrange those borders. Now, the principle of respect for self-determination holds that people should have the right to freely determine their international political status and sovereignty. Under this theory, the most important aspect of international law is that it should respect the wishes of the people who live in a region to determine for themselves what their government should be. Now, Crimea has a complex history. It's a peninsula connected to Ukraine, and historically, it was a part of Russia. Now, in 1954, Russia and Ukraine, who were both members of the Soviet Union, Russia transferred to Ukraine the Crimean Peninsula. No one is quite sure why. Technically, it was because it was a gift as a celebration of the 300th anniversary of Ukrainian independence, but some suspect that this was simply a gift from the premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, to Ukraine. In any event, the Crimean annexation occurred in 2014 following a series of conflicts in eastern Ukraine. Now, Ukraine has been divided since the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union. In Ukraine, many are unsure whether they should be closer to Russia, traditional ally, or to Europe. Now, in 2014, pro-Western revolutionaries ousted the pro-Russian president. The president was President Viktor Yanukovych, and you can see on this slide those areas of the state of Ukraine that were won by President Yanukovych, including those in which he dominated, and those that were won by a pro-Europe party, including the areas where the pro-Europe forces dominated. And after 2010, the conflict became increasingly violent with a series of demonstrations in Ukraine that eventually resulted in the president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, fleeing from Kiev, and instead a new pro-Western government was installed. Now, in Crimea, there was a great deal of negative reaction to the change in government. And in Crimea, the opposition in Crimea led to a declaration of independence by Crimea. The Crimean government then petitioned Russia for annexation. Now, the majority of Crimeans want to be a part of Russia. I don't think that anyone disputes this. The majority of Crimeans are of Russian ethnicity. They are ethnically Russian, they are culturally Russian, they are linguistically Russian. However, there remains a sizable minority of ethnic Ukrainians. Now, in terms of numbers and percentages, we can see that Russian native speakers are the majority across Crimea. And if you want to think about culturally and ethnically Russian, you're probably looking at Russian native speakers. And as you can see, the numbers range from 50% to 80% and above, those areas that are predominantly Russian. Russia and Crimea have had deep historical ties, and as Vladimir Putin said, everything in Crimea speaks of our shared history and pride. Now, along with Ukraine, Western Europe and the United States opposed the annexation. The event was condemned by many world leaders as an illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. They argued that this was a violation of agreements between Ukraine and Russia regarding sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And it led the other members of what was then the G8 to suspend Russia from the group, and then introduced the first round of sanctions against the country. The United Nations General Assembly also rejected the vote in annexation. They adopted a non-binding resolution affirming the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized border. In response, the Russian Federation has opposed the annexation label. Russia defends the referendum held in Crimea as complying with the principle of self-determination of peoples. The referendum in Russia was won overwhelmingly by that side that wanted to become part of Russia. So Russia has defended the annexation as complying with the principle of self-determination. They believe that they were protecting Crimea's right to self-government. Now, the West, however, has urged respect for territorial integrity, that the borders of Ukraine should be respected. And as I said, there were a number of sanctions put into place against Russia over the annexation of Ukraine. Here is a chart of the EU's responses. And again, this is since 2014. So we are well into 8 years worth of sanctions against Russia based on this annexation. Again, it's not just the United States and the EU. Canada has also indicated that it opposes the annexation of Crimea by Russia. But even in 2022, the annexation of Crimea remains unsettled. In this poll taken shortly after the annexation took place, we can see that a sizable number of Ukrainians recognize the results of the referendum in Crimea. 30% of Ukrainians do. In the West, 82% oppose the results of the referendum. In Eastern Europe, it is evenly split. And of course, in Crimea, as I pointed out, it overwhelmingly favors the result of the referendum. Ukraine ordered the withdrawal of its armed forces in Crimea, and it appears that it seems inevitable that Crimea is Russian and will remain Russian, despite the reaction by Western powers. International reaction is a bit more mixed. In this chart, the countries that are shown in green were in favor of considering the referendum illegal. Those in red opposed the United Nations resolution on the 2014 Crimean referendum, and those in yellow and blue abstained or were absent when the vote took place. So yes, many countries oppose the annexation. However, the support is a bit mixed across the world as a whole. Now, the Crimean conflict, of course, is part of an overall conflict between Western and Eastern Ukraine, including, as I said, whether the country should look to the West, to the EU, or to the East, to Russia, for guidance. Now, the area of Ukraine known as Donbass has been essentially in revolt against Ukraine since the 2014 revolution. In July 2021, Russia's President Vladimir Putin published an essay titled "On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians." There, he reaffirmed his view that Russians and Ukrainians were one people. Now, why is the West so concerned with Crimea? It is not simply about respect for territorial integrity, but it's about who controls the Black Sea. As you can see, Crimea is vital to control of the Black Sea. And if you are to respect the territorial waters as called for in the Law of the Sea Treaty, then that means Russia's territorial waters extend deep into the Black Sea. So in conclusion, what did we learn? A tension exists between the principles of self-determination and territorial integrity. Self-determination can be construed in different ways, and we know that disputes are often addressed through political rather than legal processes. Thanks for listening.